Well, the story which Carol just told us is part of the Christmas story that we don't really hear very much. It's part of the official lectionary, which is why we're hearing it today. And it may seem like it comes out of the blue. The words that Carol was saying were the words which Zechariah, the father of John the Baptist, said as he held the infant John the Baptist in his arms 8 days after his birth, when he was circumcised, and when he got his name. And so let's roll back a little bit. You know, we're all very familiar with the gospel story of Christmas from the Gospel of Luke, because that's the one that's got the angels and the shepherds in it, right? Untold Christmas pageants have been made out of Luke's version of it. But Luke doesn't actually start his gospel with that story. Mary's the second part of the story. The first part of the story is what happens to John the Baptist's parents. Zechariah is an old priest working in the temple, right in the middle of Jerusalem. And he's taking his turn lighting the incense. He's in a room alone. And he's a man who's highly, highly versed in the Hebrew Scriptures. He knows what all the messianic prophecies sound like. And there he is, lighting some incense, when suddenly an angel appears in front of him. And the angel says, "You and your wife Elizabeth have been chosen to get pregnant so that you can bear the baby who will become the prophet of the Messiah, the person that we know as John the Baptist." Well, this is not at all what Zechariah was expecting. The angels told him that this child should be called John. Well, that's not a name that was in Zechariah's family. So you don't name your kid something strange that isn't in your family. That just wasn't tradition. And then the bigger problem, the much, much bigger problem, was that Zechariah and his wife were old people, well past their reproductive years. So Zechariah can't make heads or tails of this, so he says to the angel, "How can I be sure of this? I am an old man and my wife is well along in years." This whole situation isn't anything like what Zechariah was expecting when the Messiah would come. And so he says, "This must be impossible." Bad answer. The angel says, "Because you have disbelieved what I have said to you, I will take away your ability to speak until the child is born." So just like that, Zechariah loses his voice. And he stays that way all the way through the pregnancy. And when the child is born and brought to him, it was up to the fathers back then to provide the name of the child. He still can't speak. He has a wax tablet. And he writes, "The child's name is John." And once he writes that, and everyone says, "Hey, you can't call him John. It's not a name in your family." He says, "The child's name is John." Suddenly his voice comes back. That's when he gets his voice. That's how the Gospel of Luke starts. And Mary is a cousin of Elizabeth, and they meet. And on our Lessons in Carols service, you'll hear about that meeting. And when they meet, that's when Mary says her famous Magnificat. But Luke's story starts with this temple priest. And you know, this temple priest who should have known, should have been ready to jump on board, but said, "Wait, this isn't what I expected." And you know, I think all of us are like that, right? One of the frustrations of the Bible is that you read it and you go, "Oh, okay, camels and shepherds and sheep and temples. None of that applies to us now. Come on, we live in an age of the internet and cars and global warming. Like, our world is so different from the world described in the Bible. How can this possibly be relevant to us today?" But what's interesting is that Luke decides to start his gospel with the story of a man who should have known what to do, but didn't, because it didn't match his expectations. And let's face it, Zechariah lived in biblical times. He's living at exactly the same time as Jesus gets conceived. So he's living with the shepherds and angels and all that stuff we associate with the Bible, and even he doesn't get it right. And that's Luke's way of saying to us, don't expect it to be exactly what you've heard when it comes. That's not actually how faith works. Faith is the intersection between what God has been telling us we need to do and whatever our world is now. You know, each of those 4 biographies of Jesus in the Bible are called Gospels. And the word gospel means good news. We tend to focus on the good, but we forget that it was also about the new as well. Every single century has a different set of circumstances, and they read the same book, and they go, how does that apply now? And it's not often, we hear people saying, the Bible's so out of date, it's full of miracles, like why should we listen to it? We need something new. We need something that was written maybe 50 years ago or a century ago, something we can relate to. But Zechariah shows you can have people living in biblical times and they still won't jump up and say yes if it's not what they expect. The problem isn't that it's out of date. The problem, Luke is saying, is how our expectations hold us back. And God has basically given us a challenge. How can you take this message of love and compassion, which I have given to you, and make it new in your times? That's always the challenge of faith. Every single day, that's the challenge of faith. And that's why, if a Christmas pageant wants to present the gospel story as a bunch of TV shows, great, super, because that's trying to make this message come alive again. And we've been doing that in this congregation, right? There's nothing about Muslims in the Bible, but we were helping a Muslim community through a couple of hard spells this year with the Ramadan food drive as well as the Backpacks Project. And we've been helping people in homeless shelters. There were no homeless shelters in the Bible. It doesn't matter. It's always a question of how are we going to take what we know the good message is and pair it up with what the new is and make it good news. It's a perennial challenge, but you know what? In that intersection, that's where faith happens. Not in waiting for it to be just like it was back then, but rather, God is waiting to see what we'll do with it right now. And I think that's good news. Amen.